Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the HR meeting. Number one is fire evacuation. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and side of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. And can I just ask members whether they got any objection if Councillor Ossulton is going to be vice chair for this meeting? Agreed? Thank you. Please note that the open proceedings of this meeting are being webcast on the internet. Now, any apologies? I have received 3 apologies here. Councillor Dunlop, Councillor West, and Councillor Leake. Any resignation and replacement? Yes, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm replacing this meeting only Councillor Eyre.
Good. Yes, Councillor Potter.
I was saying just to say how relieved I am to see you in the chair. It must have meant that Nigel Farage wasn't available. So.
Thank you. Declaration of conflict of interest. Yes, Shana.
Thank you, Chair. Please could I declare an interest on behalf of all staff for papers B, C and D? Everything.
Now we come to urgent items. On the urgent items, I have got one here on behalf of Councillor West, who is a chairman of this committee. So, Councillor West of HR committee for almost 2 years, and hope that you would all agree with him that the committee provides members with an excellent forum for supporting the effective management of the council staff within the remit of our terms of reference. However, members will be aware from the Ernst & Young recommendations that we need to be prepared as a council to put in place measures which aim to further improve member-officer relations. Consequently, Councillor West would like to propose that we ask Sheila Smith to run a workshop for committee members before or immediately after or our next meeting to explore whether there are further opportunities to support development of better ways of working between us. We could explore models used at other authorities and see if there is any best practice approaches we could adopt. Another possible outcome is that we could ask Sheila to run a series of master classes for committees on HR policies and procedures, and we should be aware, in order to be the most effective we can be when we are in committee. I would welcome members' thoughts on his proposal. Anybody? Yes, Councillor Potter.
Thank you for the introductory statement, Chair, and as I think you know, I obviously have had discussions with Councillor West, and I think I can say with Laura Taylor, which I found very constructive and helpful, really. And I think the statement that Councillor West has obviously prepared with you is, and with Shella, I'm sure, is along the lines that I think we spoke about, and I'd certainly welcome it. I mean, I know people are automatically defensive about these things, and I respect that, but I do think there are areas that, as you say, were highlighted, I think, in Ernst & Young, which inevitably should be the responsibility of this committee. And I think one way of talking that through in a friendly, I hope, and constructive way would be a workshop, timing of which you said would be agreed, and I'd certainly want to commit myself and colleagues to play a constructive role in that. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Marks?
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask the officer to make some comments on this and benchmarking with other, I don't use the word benchmarking, but looking at other, has any of that been done, and are we typical or are we atypical, please?
Thank you, Councillor. It's difficult to say whether there is a typical model as such, because they do vary across authorities. Some authorities that I've worked in have a committee like this one constituted in a similar way. There are other models from our neighbours, for example, where they will have more of an informal sort of consultative forum instead of a formal HR committee, and that would be a forum where Unison, our staff forum, for example, members and officers could work constructively in terms of formulating policy. So that there, we do know what happens at other authorities, but we've not done any specific research on it as such. It's mainly anecdotal evidence. So we can, if members are agreeable, do some research to find out what happens at other neighbouring authorities and perhaps in our family group as well, and use that as part of the discussion at the workshop if members are happy to go ahead on that basis.
If I may suggest, we would need that information before the workshop. If we all piled at the workshop time, it's going to be difficult for us to digest.
I'm happy to provide that to members in advance. Yeah.
Councillor Baker?
Thank you. Yes, I'd be happy to see a workshop being held. Now, I've wondered whether you and others felt it might be worth extending an invitation to other members who don't have the joy of being on the HR committee, if they're interested to participate in that. I think the more people involved, the better.
Yes, Councillor Potter?
Thank you. I mean, Councillor Baker's suggestion, I think, is very important. I mean, clearly there isn't a specialism here. Certainly I don't have one necessarily, and I think there are lots of other colleague councillors who have experience in terms of HR and industrial relations that could make a valid contribution, I think, to the way that we develop member and staff relations in this council. So that's a good idea. The one thing I wanted just to check, really, in regard to the composition of this, I mean, in terms of contribution from staff representatives proper, I mean, I don't know what people had in mind for this, whether it would be an inclusive workshop in the first place. I mean, I think I could argue for that, or whether you want it to be in any way two-stage, not for me to speak on behalf of Mick today here on behalf of Unison, but he might, with your approval, say something about this. But I mean, I think the more we can engage with Unison representatives, staff representatives on this matter and make sure that we're moving together on this, and I would have thought that would be a proper development, really, and something very positive for the authority. So, you know, the more inclusive we can make it, the better, I think, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. Mick Butler, Mr. Butler, welcome to the meeting. And have you got any comments you would like to make?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'd welcome anything that would improve industrial relations within the council, and any sort of workshop that looks at the way policies and procedures at the moment are being conducted would be very positive. We have got concerns around some of the way that policy and procedure is conducted, especially in respect of discipline. So we would certainly welcome anything that's going to improve that and help us look into that sort of situation.
Yes, Councillor Harvey?
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting being a substitute member here and then sitting on the informal ARGA that took place that Councillor Cherritt chaired, and then sitting on a number of the ARGA meetings that went through the EY report. I think the idea of taking this committee forward with a workshop that all members could be involved with to look at member-officer relationship is the right way. I think the idea of having it as a constructive approach from the start, so we make that absolutely clear that we're looking for constructive contributions and highlighting the specific issues that fell out, if there are any, that are of relevance that came out of the EY report. So a workshop format, I'm guessing, is probably best. And I guess we're looking at formulating policy, but also reviewing. So there's those two things that do need to be captured. It's policy making as much as reviewing policy, as always. And then I think there's the three relationships. At least from my interpretation of Ernst & Young, I think it's important that we look at member to management relationships, which I think is incredibly important. Of course it is. It's a silly thing to say, it is important. You know, member to officer relationships in terms of casework and in terms of member relationships approaching officers just as members to officers in their role, their day-to-day role, and then members to officers in committee, when officers come along to committee and present, and how that's done and the shape and form of that. So there's a number of different angles perhaps you can look at this where it's perhaps relevant falling out of the EY report for a group, a workshop, to look at it, and I definitely support Councillor Baker's proposition that it's open to all members to come along, and staff for that matter, in the way that that's as open and transparent as we can make it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Sanders.
The only thing which would concern me a bit here is not that one shouldn't have a meeting to discuss these issues, and I think you can always learn from looking at what other people do. Nobody has a divine right to the absolutely correct answer, and other people don't. I think we've just got to be very careful about defining what we're trying to achieve, and making sure that we don't cut across what may be being done in other places, whether it's being done by the Constitutional Working Party or whether it's done by ARGA or whatever. I think there is a little worry that everybody may be rushing off in different directions but trying to achieve the same thing. And I think as a council we've got to be quite disciplined about what we try and do. If we keep it to issues which are specifically related to human resources in its general terms, and if we make sure that we don't actually keep it to policy issues but to about how we deal with policy issues, in other words the mechanics of the process and how we deal with things, then I think we can quite safely go forward and have a workshop as an HR committee workshop. I think once we start to move outside of that, we're going to tread on other areas, and I mean, there's no reason for not doing that or giving a lead to other committees, but I think we need some clear, structured thought about the way the things are going to go forward, because otherwise we will find that we'll have one bit tinkered with here, another bit tinkered with there, and they won't marry up, and chaos will come. With that caveat, yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good idea, and it's a good thing to try and spread as much around as possible. I think we, on the whole, have very good relationships. But sometimes, inevitably, those relationships come under strain because circumstances will arise where they're going to. What we need to make sure is that we've got a format for dealing with those relationships that can deal with those moments of strain, but will naturally revert to a good, harmonious way of working for the majority of the time, and hopefully that's what we'll come up with.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. Councillor Osifan.
The leader's actually said most of what I was going to say, but yes, I think it's a good idea, but I would like to see a sound framework on just what exactly are we doing with policies, procedures, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to just... So,
If members are agreeable then, shall I work up a framework, bearing in mind all the comments that have been made today, if I work that up with Councillor West and look to run something perhaps immediately after our next HR committee in June, would members be agreeable with that proposal?
is that agreed?
With the only exception that I may not be here for our next meeting. But I mean, that doesn't mean to say it's the end of the world. I'm sure you can manage actually probably rather better without me. So, if I can, obviously I will.
Is that agreed, members? Oh, Councillor Howe.
Just
Okay.
quickly, it might be relevant just to, in terms of all the timetable and everything, just to run it past the director in the context of Phoebe, but with everything else, as Clive rightly says, going on in other places, if the timetable works, that's fine, that's brilliant. Just make sure it links in, really.
Thank you, Chairman. You see, by sitting at the back, I try not to contribute. I think that would be an excellent proposal. You've all highlighted the issues that in the Ernst & Young report, there's the matter for improving general officer and member relations. I think the item that Councillor West was raising around how to improve the effectiveness of this committee, which is obviously clearly a micro segment of that. So I think if Shella sets out a framework that looks at all of those stages, how could this committee work effectively around engagement, different engagement models, which includes committee or consultative forum, and then looks at some masterclasses as she outlined there, then I think we could move on to that piece of work around general officer member engagement. So I'd absolutely agree, and June isn't that far away, so I think that timetable would work. But I think, could we just say that I think as we work that up, perhaps if we have a separate dialogue with our Unison colleagues, just so we're clear how those two processes would mesh in together, because there will be a time where it's appropriate for all to be in the room, but I think maybe just at the beginning we need to do some separate work first, so everyone can speak freely and honestly without feeling that they're compromising their position in front of anybody else. But no, I'm fine with that timetable.
Thank you very much indeed.
It's not a point of information, that's all, and it's remiss of me really just finding the date of the next HR. I should know it, and I don't. Can I just be reminded of that?
Oh.
Thank you. Sorry.
Ends of June? Yes.
If I'd looked properly, Chair, I'd have seen it, wouldn't I expect? But forgive me for that.
Thank you. Well, it appears that everybody is in agreement, and Sheila is going to prepare and send you papers, etc., as to when it is going to be and who are going to be involved as well, whether it is going to be just the committee members or whether it is going to be more members than just the committee members within those workshops. How many workshops are you thinking?
Initially one.
Initially, it will be just one workshop.
Discuss future.
And then the future will be discussed at that particular workshop, and then we see where we go. But everything seems to be positive, and I am grateful to all of you. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Item 7 is to confirm the minutes held on 10th of December 2012. Yes, Councillor Mark?
As I've already mentioned, 72C, I would like to see a lot more detail, please. I do accept this is a summary of the information, but I remember at that meeting actually trying to question whether it's officers talking to the public face-to-face, officers talking to the public on the telephone, or officers talking to councillors, or even committee meetings like us. I really would like to see that honed in where the issues are. Or possibly, we don't interview properly. We have the wrong interview technique if we're getting the wrong people. I don't think that's the case. But this is a little bit, not enough detail. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Councillor. In the body of the report that accompanied the minutes here, we do go into some detail about the levels of sickness absence within business units, which does give you a bit more of an indication of the types of roles that are within that job and whether they are front-facing people or whether they're back office staff, etc. But certainly the next operational management issues report is on the agenda for our June meeting, and certainly we can explore that in more detail and provide some more detail to members as you've already requested, whilst also being mindful of the need to obviously secure confidentiality issues as well.
Councillor Baker?
Thank you. I realise that Hilary Brummel is no longer working for the council. I wondered whether we were going to have a staff forum representative in future at these meetings.
Sheila?
Yes, we are going to. We do have a new chair of the staff forum. That's Nicholas Collins from the property team, and the vice chair is Simon Christian, who's one of our community development officers. They certainly will be coming to future meetings. Unfortunately, neither of them were able to attend the meeting today, but the rest of the meetings for the year are diaried in their diary, so they will be here in future.
Hillary. Yeah. I hope that members will join me to wish Hilary Brummel the very best. She has served us well, and I hope that everything goes okay for her in future. Right. So we got paper, the minutes to confirm. Can we confirm the minutes? Great. Do I need to sign? We haven't got any member or public participation today. Referral from other committees, we got none. We have nothing issued or referred by the cabinet. So we come to item 11, which is pension auto enrollment. Sheila, would you present the papers?
Thank you, Chair. This report advises HR Committee of the requirements of the pension reform legislation covering auto-enrolment. The legislation means that employers have to make arrangements for all employees automatically to join a qualifying pension scheme that satisfies minimum requirements, and each employer has a staging date from which they must comply, and we have been formally notified that our staging date is the 1st of November 2013. Under the Council's constitution, HR Committee recommends to full Council any element of discretion involving the Council's statutory pension scheme that falls outside the delegated powers of the Head of Paid Service and Strategic Directors, and that's why this report has come to the Committee today. So it's therefore, the Committee is therefore asked to recommend to full Council firstly, that the Council opts to use the transitional arrangements to defer assessment of our existing workforce from the 1st of November until the 30th of September 2017, which is the latest that you can defer to. Also, that the Council defers the eligibility to auto-enrol casual workers for 3 months from their start date with the Council. And thirdly, that the Council does not postpone its auto-enrolment staging date of 1st of November 2013. That would apply to new staff, just to be clear. Thank you.
Any questions? Councillor Baker?
Yes, I'd be very grateful if we could have an explanation of actually what is involved in assessment.
Eligibility for auto-enrolment is dependent on a number of criteria, and those are the person's earnings and also their age. And the appendix at the back of this report just gives you a very brief summary, which shows that depending on what your earnings and your age are, determines what category you're put into. And there are 3 different categories for auto-enrolment purposes. The vast majority of staff at BDBC are what's called eligible job holders, which means that they must be auto-enrolled into the local government pension scheme, and if they want to opt out they can do so, but we have to auto-enroll them, and if they opt out we have to re-enroll them every 3 years. We do have a small number of staff who fall into the non-eligible job holder category. That's because they're either under the age bracket to be an eligible job holder, or their earnings are at the lower level. So hopefully that explains what the requirements of assessment actually are. So you just have to go through that assessment every month to look at how your employees fare against those criteria.
But then from the information that's elsewhere in the report, it seems that we've actually done that already, because we know how many staff are eligible and not.
Yeah. Yes, this is one of the slightly bizarre circumstances of this legislation. Of course, this legislation applies nationally to all employers. The local government pension scheme is already an auto-enrolment scheme. So we do already auto-enroll people when they first join, and they have the option of opting out if they wish to. And obviously, currently, we have 97 staff who've chosen to opt out of the scheme. So we have to still go through this process from the date of our staging date. We have to go through a process where we have to re-enroll all of those people who've already opted out. And then every 3 years, we have to re-enroll people again who've already opted out. So it's slightly confusing for our staff, unfortunately, but that's just one of the quirks of the scheme.
Anybody else? Again, yeah, okay.
So, seeing as we already write to staff, and have done recently, who are not enrolled, and reminded them that they can enrol, the saving that's quoted is probably not really going to be a saving at all, is it? Because the likelihood is that those staff, for their own personal reasons, do not wish to be a member of the scheme, and so when auto-enrolled, will promptly opt out again. And so delaying until 17 to start that automatic review is not actually a real saving in my mind.
Yeah. Apologies if the report gives the implication, it implies that it is a cost saving, because that's not the case. I guess more than anything, it's actually a cost implication for the council if we do decide to auto-enrol everybody from the 1st of November. Now, you're quite right, Councillor Baker, those staff that have opted out have made a conscious decision to do so, so it's highly likely that they would opt out again. But because they've already made that conscious decision, I guess we're suggesting that we delay transition because we have already given that option to staff and they have chosen to opt out, and we're suggesting that should continue for as long as possible before we have to auto-enrol them again and they have to go to the trouble of opting out.
Right. Yes, Councillor Sanders?
It does rather sound like a job creation scheme, doesn't it, for people with typewriters and those who want to keep the post office going with stamps. There is clearly a reason behind it, which is a laudable reason, to make sure that everybody is making some kind of provision for their old age, which is fine. But this idea that people, anybody can opt back in if they want to at any stage at the moment anyway. So this daft thing that we have to keep writing to loads of people once every 3 years to say, would you, we have just done something you didn't want us to do, would you like to confirm that you don't want us to do it again, I suppose it might catch one or two who'd actually just forgotten about it and not put the issue in front of themselves. It's a bit like people renewing your insurance for your car premium every year automatically if you don't watch it happening. But it does seem to me, since it's a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare, the longer we can put it off for, the better.
Point taken, Councillor Sanders. All right. Anybody want to speak on this paper? It's open for click.
I mean, I have the same view in one regard to the leader on this matter, but on the other hand, I mean, it's the way the regulations are formed. And as he said, I think they're formed in that way for good reason. I mean, the intention always, I think, is that wherever possible, even though people, may have changed circumstances, and that occurs with all of us really, but should be encouraged, continuously encouraged and reminded of the need to make this provision for their later years, I think is a good thing. And yes, it is tedious in some regard and bureaucratic, but I think it is necessary, and the more we can encourage people to take up pensions where they exist and are available, the better. But I understand the difficulties that go with that in terms of the process, but I think it's well worth it. But the regs are formed in that way anyway, really, and I don't think we can, quite frankly, go outside of them in any case, can we?
I don't see anybody else. Oh, Councillor Baker.
I just wondered if Unison had expressed any view over this.
Mick.
I mean, Unison's position is quite clear. I mean, we recommend all our members should sign up to the pension scheme. As you can see from the action last year, when they tried to attack our pension scheme, we would certainly recommend anything that encourages people to take out a pension and a local government pension scheme.
Right. Have we got anybody else want to say anything? No. Well, we have got the recommendations here, number 1, 2, and 3, which has to go to the full council. Is that agreed? Great. So that's agreed. Now, item 12, which is a pay policy statement. Sheila?
Thank you, Chair. This report sets out the pay policy statement for 2013-14 and also the outcome of the pay benchmarking exercise, which was completed in February this year. So with regards to the pay policy statement, hopefully members will be aware that the Localism Act requires each local authority to produce such a statement explaining its approach to the pay of its chief officers, its lowest paid employees, and the relationship between the two. The statement must be adopted by full council and it must also be produced for the financial year and be reviewed annually. So the pay policy statement within this report is for the financial year 2013-14. HR Committee recommends to full council staff retention packages and incentives that fall outside the delegated powers of head of paid service and directors. Therefore, the committee is asked to recommend to full council that the pay policy statement in Appendix B is adopted. Appendix A also contains a version of the 2013-14 statement with the track changes on from the previous year's statement, so you can see hopefully quite clearly what those changes have been. The pay policy statement also confirms that the council seeks to position itself in the upper quartile for pay and benefits. And on the 10th of December last year, this committee considered a report on pay benchmarking and agreed that benchmarking on a sample of posts should be undertaken, and the results of this used to inform the review of the pay policy statement for 2013-14. This exercise has now been carried out for the council by the Hay Group. One of the key findings of this exercise is that 82% of the council's posts are in the upper quartile when benchmarked against base salaries for a local government group, which indicates that the aspiration to be in the upper quartile is still being met. And consequently, it's recommended that the pay policy statement does not need to be amended in this regard. I'm obviously happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Any questions, Councillor Sanders?
Yeah, I had one question, which was 82% are in the upper quartile, but did it actually say whether any of them were in the upper decile?
Yes, there are some posts that are in the top 10%. Yes, there are. The range is quite wide within that upper quartile. I have to say I haven't gone into detail in looking at that because for this report we were really only focusing on the upper quartile, so I was looking at the 75th percentile. But there are some posts that are in the highest level. Yes, not many as I recall.
Any more questions? Yes, Councillor Baker.
It's a comment, really, just to say how much clearer the plain English version is than the previous one was. And it's a pleasure to see that.
Councillor Potter.
Just a couple of things, if I may, Chair. I mean, in regard to where is it, page, sorry, 18 of 68, I mean, in terms of consultation, again, there are people here who can speak for themselves, but in regard to the commentary about detailed consultation with Unison hasn't been necessary, I mean, I understand the technical aspects of that, but presumably there is, discussion and at the very best, I hope, provision of information and the like with Unison over this matter, even if it doesn't go under the proper heading of consultation. The other area I just wanted to raise, if I can, Chair, and there's a couple of references to it within the report, but is the whole area of compromise agreements. And clearly we have a process, as others do, and I know others that don't, to be frank, as well on this really, but the preamble talks about exceptional circumstances in regard to compromise agreements and the delegated way that these are dealt with, the head of governance involved, and obviously there's references to other officers of the council. I mean, my view is that as they are exceptional, and as, to be frank, in many cases they can involve a large amount of public money, that there ought to be some member involvement in signing these off. Now, I don't take that too far, but I do think there's a role for the head of HR committee in the actual signing off a compromise agreement, even when it's been agreed. I mean, I know obviously there are solicitors, legal representatives involved on both sides, it goes without saying, and they don't get to be a compromise agreement until they've gone through the legal and technical process associated with that. But ultimately, we're talking about a settlement which applies, and in many cases it's a deal which is made for good purpose, of course. But I do think that there is an elected member role in that. I'm not suggesting for a minute that the elected member should be involved in the detail of that, but certainly signing it off for good reason at the end of it should be a part of this process, in my view. And I don't believe there's any legal or technical reason why we couldn't have that as part of the way we undertake compromise agreements in this authority.
Just in terms of the issue of consultation, just to reassure members that this pay policy statement is a statement of fact of what we already do. The information that's gone behind this, when something changes, that would be consulted, Unison would be consulted, as would staff generally through the staff forum be consulted. So an example would be the essential user allowance, which is the next report that we have to consider. Consultation with Unison on that did take place. So just to reassure you that consultation on pay and rewards issues does take place with Unison and with staff generally. In terms of the issue of compromise agreements, I guess in response it would be worth saying that staffing matters are within the remit of the head of paid service, so that's currently why financial standing orders put them within officer remit rather than members remit.
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful to share. I mean, in fairness, I think I understand the way this has been structured over the time, the way it is delegated in that way to the head of paid services. I don't think that forestalls my observation, and there are things that I might be able to do elsewhere in this regard, and I make the point, I think, and I believe there ought to be an elected member role in that, a direct involvement for the head of this, the chair of this committee to actually be involved in signing that off when it's gone through the process. And I think there are legitimate reasons why that should be the case.
Can we leave that with Shella Smith to really look at it and then bring something back to another meeting, and then we can deal with that. Is that okay?
We need to agree the statement today.
Yeah. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to that, I think in the context, and again this picks up an awful lot of the language and the manner in which we've been moving recently, I think in terms of accountability and in terms of transparency, it would be appropriate, and I think not to get looking into it, this needs to be seriously taken up, and if not here, then it will be taken up somewhere else, in the context that there is a democratic oversight. That's all they're asking for. There's nothing more complicated than that. That in terms of the chair of HR, as the appropriate post, and it should be, it's not a cabinet matter, this is a matter for the council, therefore it should be the committee, therefore it is the chair of HR, should have a democratic oversight of those matters where we are talking about significant sums. and particular context of where we've got to, compromise agreements and so on, without going into any detail or anything like that. Which in the context of this, we should seize the initiative. There's no reason to kick it into the long grass, and I would hate to see that happen. So if we're going to do it, let's do it. And if it doesn't happen, we'll obviously bring it back somewhere else because we think this is very important.
Can we have, yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for letting me speak again. I think if I can once again say Ernst & Young, there are some matters in the Ernst & Young report that talk around where is the appropriate level of member involvement in some decisions that have historically sat completely within the officer purview. You've had a debate already at full council around when should legal proceedings be progressed and how. And that's certainly on the Ernst & Young action plan. And I think the matter that colleagues are raising here is one that I think could be really usefully dealt with at your workshop, because that is around what's the effectiveness and what's the scope of the HR committee, and how do we build in member oversight if that's indeed appropriate to do. So I think it is possible to put that as a specific item in the workshop that's probably best discussed, so we can take a view on it privately, so members can hear the pros and cons of both and how we can best expedite a compromise agreement if that's what's necessary to do. And is it a member just signing off? Well, does that really give you democratic oversight, or is that just a member signing off? So, I mean, I think there's some issues that we need to discuss around there about how we build members' involvement into lots of issues: procurement, legal proceedings, compromise agreements. And that then goes back to the Ernst & Young recommendation, which is around reviewing the scheme of delegation. So I think all of these nuggets we can put into the bucket of that eventually.
Thank you. Councillor Sanders.
Yeah, I think just to finish off on that point before I come to my other couple of points, you could be very clear. Oversight is of no value. What you're talking about, other than you enable you to find out what's going on. Are we talking about people being the ultimate decision maker or not? And if so, is that one person? Is it a group of people? There's a whole lot of things involved in that decision-making process, which is quite a can of worms to open up, because with the ability to make decisions also goes the responsibility and the accountability for that, and whether it is fair to have an elected person who's not an employee of the council making a decision about employment issues of paid staff, I think is technically, probably legally, quite a difficult one to look at, quite apart from anything else. So I think it isn't as simple as it seems. I think the ability for members to make their views known to the ultimate decision maker is a different issue, and there's quite a reasonable case for that to be said in some way that can be done in an appropriate and quick fashion that doesn't bog the whole thing down in weeks and weeks of interminable pottering on. But that I'm sure we will come to at some point somewhere else. My other 2 points were very quickly, just going on from the question I raised earlier on about the upper decile. That seems to me grounds for looking a little bit more carefully at where we might be overpaying for some jobs. If our objective was only to reach the upper quartile and not the upper decile, why have we got some that have crept in there? It may be historical, all sorts of reasons for doing it, but at least to review that at some point in the future would be quite a useful thing for us to do. And the only other thing is to state, what probably most people would expect me to state, is that how sad 4.8 is in the report. And before you all have to look it up, I'll just tell you what it says, which is performance-related pay. The council does not offer performance-related pay to any employee. And what a sad thing it is that we don't actually pay people by how good they are, but rather just how long they've been here.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. Do you want to say anything now? Councillor Mark.
Two points. If we're going to treat the chair of HR as a professional who's got responsibility, then they need training. And it's rather pointless just training one person, we might have to train more, so there's add-on costs there. The bigger issue is, if HR is going to have a bigger say, we are open to being lobbied, because in a dispute there's always two sides, or normally two sides, so we will then probably end up with emails coming at us from both sides. If that's what we want, that's fine. If not,
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I think that's probably an issue to discuss at the workshop as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, councillors. And anybody wants to say anything else? No? Well, we got the recommendations here at 2.1 and 2.2. And is that agreed? Yep. Unanimous, yeah, that's good. Right, number 13, item 13, we're coming to the review of the Essential Car User Scheme, paper D. Sheila?
Thank you, Chair. This report asks the committee to consider changes to the Council's Essential Car User Scheme and associated mileage payments. So by way of background, a post is designated as essential user if the person uses their car at least once a week for work and travels at least 500 business miles each year. A review of the existing scheme has shown that it is needlessly complicated and that the minimum mileage criteria is very low when we benchmarked ourselves against other local authorities. Consequently, this report proposes an increase in the minimum mileage criteria from 500 to 1,500 business miles per year, which would essentially remove the lowest banding in the Council's current essential user scheme. It is also proposed to move to the NJC scheme of allowances instead of using the current local agreement. The NJC allowances are reviewed at a national level on an annual basis and take account of the cost of running a car. HR Committee agreed to introduce a CO2 emission limit on cars as a result of a previous report on car allowances that was presented to you in March 2012. But there's currently no CO2 emission limit for cars under the Essential User Scheme. Therefore, this report also proposes that the same CO2 emission limit is applied to the Essential User Scheme. So that is currently 165 grams per kilometre. That means that cars under this scheme would be limited to those CO2 emission limits, but that would only apply when a person sought to change the car that they were registering under the scheme. That limit is set to reduce by 5 grams per kilometre each year. However, it is proposed in this report that a cap on reductions is introduced for all types of car allowance, so that a reduction to 160 grams per kilometre takes place on the 1st of April this year, and then to a further 155 grams per kilometre on the 1st of April 2014, but that no further reductions take place after that time. That addresses the concerns that were raised by some staff through the consultation process, that if they cannot afford to purchase a new car, older cars are more likely to have higher CO2 emission limits, so a constantly reducing limit might detrimentally impact on those staff. For staff who would lose an essential user allowance if the recommendations in this report are agreed, the Council does pay a casual user allowance of 45 pence per mile for any business mileage incurred, and alternatively staff can use one of the Council's 3 pool cars to make their journey. It's already been agreed that the number and type of pool cars will be reviewed and the number increased if needed, but currently they're only used for about 20% of their available capacity. Staff can also have a car loan to assist them to purchase a car, and it is not proposed to change the criteria for this scheme, which means that staff affected by the proposal in this report could still qualify for a loan, provided they do at least 500 business miles per year. Alternatively as well, they can also make use of the new salary sacrifice scheme to lease a new car for 3 years, which also has the benefit of lower CO2 emissions, which in turn obviously reduces the running cost of that car. And furthermore, a 2-year protection period will apply to staff who would otherwise lose their entitlement in accordance with the protection of salary policy that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Any questions? Councillor Potter first, and then...
Apologies, Chair, I'm sure it's contained in here, or she said it a minute ago and I should have been listening better, but in terms of the new eligibility requirements, moving from 500 to 1,500 miles, how many staff does that impact upon, Sheila? Sorry.
It is contained in the report, Councillor Potter. It's 4.1.4, people at essential user band E, that would be 50 posts. So 50 people would lose an allowance under these proposals after the 2-year protection period.
Councillor Baker.
I think it's right that there is a protection period in place because it can make quite a significant difference. And I and note that where the CO2 allowance limits sit, I think is quite surprisingly high. The average new car in the last year, 2012, had a CO2 emissions of 133. So 165 is very considerably above that. And of course, not only does the lower CO2 rating mean that running costs are lower, but that includes car tax limits as well, which were changed, of course, in the budget. I think 165 was band H, so very well up the scale. 150 grams would still be band F. I think seeing as I can understand that staff would be concerned about the cost implications if they needed to buy a new car. But seeing as there are other alternatives in place, such as using the pool car and the salary sacrifice or a car loan scheme, that actually there is quite a lot of protection there without needing to have a very high, what I feel is a very high figure on the emissions rate. So I would prefer that we still keep the pressure on that to encourage all those members of staff for whom the council is supporting their motoring to use as efficient cars as possible.
Yes, Councillor Sanders.
My question is how we arrived at a proposed threshold of 1,500. Because, I mean, having just worked it out, if you assume that those 1,500 miles were travelled at 20 miles an hour, that's approximately 1.7 hours a week. So these essential users are actually for 35 hours of their week not using a car at all, which doesn't seem to me to be in the category essential. Looking back over experiences I've had in the private sector, one normally looks around about 5,000 miles as being the threshold at which you move over to essential from being casual, and up until that point you either use the casual users allowance or pool cars or whatever the arrangement might be most appropriate for what they're doing. So how did we alight on 1,500 as being a good figure as opposed to, 500 is clearly ludicrous, but why 1,500? Why not something like 5,000, where the amount of mileage is getting towards regular usage on a day-by-day basis to be able to perform the function that they have to, or moving stuff around? That's what, if you're going to call it essential, then it should be essential and not convenient.
Sheila.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. We did this by benchmarking ourselves with other councils, and we looked at other councils in Hampshire and also our family group. The variation amongst them was huge, to be honest. The Isle of Wight, for example, I believe the threshold is 6,000 miles, and when you consider the size of the island, it would be almost impossible, I think, whereas other councils don't have a threshold at all. They just say that it's for the manager to determine whether a post is essential user. Most of the others were around about the 2,000 miles, but as I say, there wasn't really a consistent picture we decided on 1,500 miles. That was done through the Equal Pay Working Group. We felt that that fitted in quite well with our existing scheme of allowances, and that 1,500 miles was a reasonable increase that did still indicate that you were using your car for regular business mileage. So we felt that was a reasonable compromise as a group.
I mean, that, if I may say so, it doesn't seem to be a logical way to progress. It's because it's within touching base of where we are at the moment, which is wrong, is why that's where we want to move to. You might want to move to that as an interim step to getting to where you ought to be, but I would have thought what we ought to be doing here is laying down, if it's a policy, where we ought to be ultimately, and then working out how we're going to get from point A to point B, and over what period do we phase that. Because I can't see any more justification for 1,500 than I could for 500.
Yes.
If we do move to the NJC scheme of allowances, there's no minimum mileage criteria set down within that. So it is for us as a council to determine what we feel is a reasonable level, and we felt as a working group that 1,500 miles was a reasonable minimum to recommend to members. But I appreciate the points that you're making.
Councillor Potter.
I mean, I think it's worth saying, isn't it? I mean, the essential aspect, I mean, the definition of essential isn't purely related to the mileage. I know it's being argued in the way it is today because this is the way the scheme is formed. But essential can mean just in my view, the need to actually have that vehicle available to do that type. It may be minimal mileage on behalf of the employer, and in a council where I guess a majority of the activity is fairly confined to what I describe as the urban area. I mean, after all, we're not all travelling backwards and forwards to Newbury every day. And, clearly the urban use, I think, is just as important, would indicate probably a very low mileage, but nevertheless an essential use. I mean, contrary to what Councillor Sanders is saying, I think I could have argued, had I been in a position of arguing, I'm not, that there was a lower interim figure, and progressively some interim process was used that gradually moved it up to 1,500, but that's been done, that's dusted, that's been the subject of consultation. I see obviously a number of staff commented that the proposed threshold of 1,500 is too high. Presumably that's the 50 most affected, so I guess understandably they'd have some concern about that, but I don't know whether that is all of the 50. But no, it's not for me to speak on behalf of the staff involved, but I would have thought this was a reasonable compromise and a necessary one in the context of what you've been seeking to consult over and negotiate.
Councillor Baker.
I think I agree with Councillor Potter that I think it's a reasonable compromise, and I think that this is something where perhaps comparisons with the private sector aren't necessarily so helpful. Very different the kind of mileage we would expect one of our officers to do than a sales rep covering half the country. Then, by virtue of the job that building control, planning officers, environmental health officers, the journeys are within the boundaries of the borough. But clearly those officers need to make site visits. Housing officers may need to make home visits. And as Councillor Potter said, the majority of those visits are likely to be relatively short mileage. So I think it's quite a reasonable way forward.
Mr. Sanders.
Yeah, I mean, a sales rep, even, they shouldn't be covering half the country. It's not really a sales rep's job, but a sales rep will normally do between 12 and 17, 20,000 a year. So we're not talking about comparable distances here. I think, the figures quoted in here, I think, were the building control does 6,000 plus a year, and the way Councillor Baker was pulling out these things, there clearly are some people who do have, by virtue of their job, a very regular requirement for a car. And I'm not saying they should not be essential users. What I am saying is that I think that the benchmark has been set too low for essential users, and that it would not be too difficult to identify who are the people who have this genuine need and who are the people who are actually getting effectively an enhanced allowance on a regular cash basis. That really the mileage is not justifying it. I mean, what happens if we say that the threshold is 1,500, somebody's going to do 1,500 and then they only do 1,450? Do we take the allowance away from them at that point for the following year? Right. I just think that we are fudging the issue with this and not really addressing the thing of what are the real jobs that really do need the transport help, and which are the ones where we've just taken a figure because it was a conveniently bottom end figure that we thought we might be able to get away with.
Thank you. Yeah, just to reassure members that the minimum mileage criteria is just one criteria that's used. There are others which are they must have a car available for work purposes, and that's something that has to be signed off by the manager. And also that they must be doing at least one business journey per week. So this couldn't be somebody who maybe travels on a course 3 times a year to Kent or whatever and does their 1,500 miles per year that way. That wouldn't qualify as an essential user. So there are other criteria that go alongside the minimum mileage criteria.
Thank you for this. Has Mick got any comments?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, this has been quite a long drawn out to get to this point. I mean, those of you who were on the committee last year will know that this has come. So, you know, I mean, there's winners and losers, but at the end of the day, I think this is the best that we've got.
This is a recommendation to the full council. Is it agreed? Yes, I see. Yeah. You want it noted? No.
I still have concern about the ceasing of the 5 grams per kilometre reduction on CO2 emissions.
Can I go through the by number then? Number 1, essential car user. Is that agreed? Anybody got any comment on that? Okay. Before I get it agreed, can I have Laura Taylor to say something?
Chairman, thank you for letting me sit at the table. May I just make a suggestion, members, because I'm conscious this is a recommendation on to full council. Clearly, there can be debate again. I mean, I must firstly say there is absolutely no doubt that green credentials are important to the council, and the proposal that officers have put forward, it does indeed slow down and stop the level of reduction on CO2 emissions in direct response to consultation feedback. There's another view in that the 1,500 mileage cap is insufficient. May I make a suggestion in order to progress with this, because clearly this is about staff's terms and conditions, that you perhaps accept these recommendations and recommend them onto council as a staging post, because if we added another recommendation, which was that for the head of HR to undertake a further review in 14-15, that would allow you again to look at the CO2 emissions, because you're only doing 5 grams this year, 5 grams next year. And then if we have a mixture in the room of 1,500 maybe too low versus let's take it as a staged approach to 1,500, but we accept we're there already, we could then re-look at the 1,500 again. I add that as just as an option that you may feel more able to recommend to council in its totality if you thought you had a further review in 14-15. But clearly I don't think I'm allowed to put that on the table.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
I'll propose that the recommendation.
No.
Claire,
Yes.
this is to go to full council for the next financial year, correct?
Yes.
So it is only 1 year anyway. Is that?
No, it will apply then. It will apply therefore.
All right. So we're now saying this is for next financial year with this extra one that we've just done. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. Can I? What's the amendment, Councillor Sanders?
Exactly what.
Taylor said.
I can.
Yeah. Is that agreed? Agreed. That's right then. Did you get that?
Yes.
Lovely. So do I go? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Shall I?
The purpose of this report is to present the committee with a new procedure explaining how the council will handle redundancy situations. The policy has been revised to ensure it reflects legislation and good practice and to make it hopefully easier to understand. It also clarifies roles and responsibilities when handling redundancy situations and clarifies the appeals procedure that staff can use in regard to this. The policy has not changed, though, in regard to the Council's overarching approach to handling redundancy situations, and it has not proposed any changes to the formulas for calculating redundancy payments. The main differences between the current security of employment policy, as it's currently called, and the proposed redundancy handling policy are summarised in paragraph 4.1 of the report. And then in 4.2 there's a table which cross-references the provisions contained within the existing procedure to where they are in the new procedure, because members will appreciate that we've started from scratch with this policy rather than do track changes on the existing version. Unison has confirmed it supports the new policy and believes it is an improvement in regard to its clarity and layout, and it's therefore recommended that the committee approves the revised redundancy handling policy. Thank you.
Any questions? Councillor Baker?
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to, in the policy itself, in paragraph 5, paragraph on appeals, should that still be placement in the first line, or should it be job matching to match the change in language, which is far clearer?
Sorry, Councillor Baker, can you just clarify which paragraph you're referring to?
Yes, of course. I was looking at the appendix, the actual policy, which I think is Appendix B. And on that policy, I was looking at paragraph 5.1, which is on page 63 of 68. And the first sentence says, if individuals do not agree with the decisions made regarding the placement or ring fencing assessment, an appeal can be made within 5 working days. But I think we've changed the language and talk about job matching now rather than placement. So perhaps that's the language that ought to be in that paragraph as well.
Shall I?
Yes, you're quite correct. That would make it more consistent with the overarching approach that we've taken to this policy, so I'd happily change that word in 5.1 from placement to job matching. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Potter?
I mean, in fairness, and Councillor Baker's picked it up. I mean, going over the page, obviously 64, it is actually referred to properly, isn't it, in the summary listings of the appeal process. So what Councillor Baker's pointed out would draw that into line. I just wondered if I could, in terms of information, whether Shello would have it available, in terms of actual appeals made by employees against the job matching ring fencing decision, how many are we talking about? I mean, I haven't given you a period even, I realise, but I mean, is it a regular, common process?
No, it's not, Councillor Potter. I can think of less than 2 appeals a year, two or less appeals per year in the past, given that we have been through a period of change, and so there have been quite a number of job matching decisions and ring fence assessments made, the number of appeals is actually very low.
Any other question? No. Anybody wants to speak on the paper? No. So this is, oh, Councillor Baker.
Looking at Appendix C, I perhaps was being a bit slow when I was reading it, but the last paragraph of the job matching section says if the 2/3 rule doesn't apply, but 50%, the new post contains at least 50% of the current substantive post, then it could be ring fenced. So why do we have a 2/3 rule, not a 50% rule?
If the 2/3 rule applies and there is only one candidate in contention, they are slotted in and they don't have to go through an assessment process or anything of that nature.
So the need for it is where there is no existing post that fits the 2/3 rule, but there are posts that fit 50%. Right, yes. But if there was someone who had 2/3 of the job, then they would be slotted in, and someone whose job was 50% wouldn't. Yeah. Thank you.
I don't see any further comments, so yeah,
I
Councillor
should be
Sean.
ever so picky then, in that case. 66% is not 2/3. And so, just to avoid, you can see somebody picking it up because, it's actually, if you're going to round it up, it's 67%. So, just for the avoidance of doubt.
Agreed,
Yeah.
Councillor Sanders.
It's a fair point.
It's a fair point,
We
yes.
do get down to percentages.
Yes. Okay, this is... okay, members, this is a recommendation for this committee to approve. Are you all in favor of it? Yes? Great. Lovely, thank you. Well, thank you very much indeed, members. Mick, thank you very much for coming. Officers?
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Meeting closed.